Chapter 1. The Board of Faces. The fluorescent lights in the Precinct 17 bullpen hummed with the particular frequency that Detective Marcus Webb had learned to hate over 18 years of service. It was a sound that lived in the spaces between thoughts, the kind that made your teeth ache if you listened too long. Tonight, that hum felt louder than usual, as if the building itself was trying to drown out the silence that had settled over his desk. He stood before the board. 27 faces stared back at him, each one frozen in the particular stillness of photographs taken in better times: birthday parties, wedding receptions, graduation ceremonies, moments when these people had been alive and present and whole, never imagining that their smiling faces would one day be pinned to a corkboard in a room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. 27 people. 27 lives interrupted. 27 families waiting for phone calls that might never come. Marcus Webb was 53 years old, and he had seen enough of human cruelty to recognize its fingerprints. He had tracked killers through the labyrinthine streets of the city, had sat across from men who had done unspeakable things, had learned to read the geography of violence in the way a body fell or a room was disturbed. He understood murder. He understood the motives that drove people to take lives: jealousy, greed, rage, the terrible mathematics of passion. But this case, these cases, defied his understanding. There was no pattern he could discern, no victimology that made sense. The missing ranged from a 19-year-old college student named Thomas Marsh to a 64-year-old retired accountant named Bernard Fox. There was a young mother, Maria Santos, who had stepped out to buy milk and never returned. There was a businessman, James Holloway, whose car was found idling in an empty parking lot, the driver's door hanging open as if he had simply stepped out of existence. And there was Cadence "Caddy" Morrison. Marcus found himself drawn to her photograph more often than the others. It was not that she was particularly beautiful, though she was certainly pretty in an unremarkable way: chestnut hair, a splash of freckles across a button nose, eyes the color of weak tea. She was 24 years old, a graduate student in library science, and she had a smile that suggested she found the world endlessly amusing. She had disappeared 7 months ago. Her roommate had reported her missing when she failed to return from an evening walk. Her path, reconstructed through cell phone records and the testimony of neighbors, had taken her through Ashworth Hills, one of the city's oldest and wealthiest neighborhoods, a place of Victorian mansions and manicured gardens where money bought privacy and privacy bought silence. The last known location of her phone was a street called Larkspur Lane. More specifically, it was approximately 12 meters from the iron gates of number 47 Larkspur Lane, a property owned by one Harold Alfred Smith. Marcus had driven past that house twice in the last week, never stopping, merely observing. He told himself he was gathering impressions, building a sense of the place before making formal contact. The truth was something closer to reluctance. There was something about that house, something about the way its windows caught the light, the way its shadow seemed to stretch a little too far across the street in the late afternoon, that made him want to keep his distance. But distance would not bring Caddy Morrison home. Distance would not explain why 5 of the 27 missing persons had last been seen within a half-mile radius of Harold Smith's residence. Distance would not silence the humming of the fluorescent lights. "You're still here." Marcus turned to find Captain Elena Reyes standing in the doorway of the bullpen, her coat already on, her car keys dangling from her fingers. She was a compact woman with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. "Can't sleep?" he said. "That's not a reason to be here. That's a reason to see a doctor. I've got a feeling about this one, Elena." The captain walked over to the board, her reflection ghosting across the laminated faces of the missing. She stopped before the photograph of Caddy Morrison and was silent for a long moment. "Harold Smith," she said, finally. I looked into him after you mentioned the connection, and he's old money. Family goes back 6 generations in this city. His grandfather was a steel baron. His father was a judge on the state's Supreme Court. Harold himself made his fortune in antiquities, buying and selling rare artifacts. He retired 15 years ago, but he's still connected. He knows people. What kind of people? The kind that answer phones that I can't even find the numbers for. Marcus absorbed this information. He's protected. Not protected exactly, he's just smooth. There's never been a complaint against him, never a scandal, never a rumor. He pays his taxes on time, contributes generously to charity, and keeps to himself. He's a model citizen. 5 people disappeared within a half-mile radius of his residence, Elena. Coincidence? You don't believe in coincidence. Captain Reyes turned away from the board. Her reflection lingered for a moment, superimposed over Caddy's smiling face, before dissolving into shadow. What I believe doesn't matter. What matters is evidence. You go to that house, you ask your questions, and you do it by the book. If there's something there, you find it. If there's not, you move on. And if he won't talk to me? Then you come back here and we try something else. She paused at the doorway, looking back over her shoulder. Be careful, Marcus. I've been in this job long enough to know that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous. After she left, Marcus stood alone in the humming silence, studying the faces on the board. 27 people. 27 lives suspended in the amber of uncertainty. Families who could not mourn because they could not be certain. Lovers who could not move on because they could not let go. And somewhere in this city, someone knew what happened to them. Marcus looked at Caddy Morrison one last time. Her tea-colored eyes seemed to hold a question he could not quite decipher. I'm coming, he whispered to the photograph. Tomorrow, I'm coming to find you. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal, aching hum. The photograph stared back, silent and still. Chapter 2. The Geography of Secrets. The next morning came wrapped in the gray silk of autumn fog. Marcus Webb woke before dawn, his body responding to the particular tension that always preceded significant moments in a case. He showered, dressed in his best suit, charcoal gray, conservative, a suit for official business, and sat at his kitchen table drinking coffee while the sky outside his window slowly brightened from black to purple to the soft gray of a pearl. His apartment was spare and functional, the living space of a man who had long ago stopped pretending that he was anything other than what he was, a detective, first and last and always. His marriage had ended 12 years ago, not with drama or betrayal, but with the quiet erosion of 2 people who had forgotten how to live in each other's presence. His children, a daughter in Seattle, a son in Chicago, called on holidays and birthdays with the dutiful affection of adults who had learned to love their father from a distance. This was his life now, the cases, the victims, the endless search for truth in a world that seemed determined to hide it. He drove through the city as morning traffic began to thicken, taking the long route to Ashworth Hills. He wanted to approach the Smith residence with fresh eyes, to see it as a stranger might, to catch any detail that familiarity might have obscured. Ashworth Hills rose from the eastern edge of the city like a dream of another century. The streets were lined with ancient oak trees whose branches arched overhead, creating tunnels of green in summer and skeletal lattices of shadow in autumn and winter. The houses were mansions in the truest sense of the word, estates built by men who had made fortunes in steel and rail and oil, men who believed that their wealth entitled them to private kingdoms within the larger nation. Most of these estates had been subdivided over the decades, carved into apartments or converted into museums, or sold to developers who built condominiums on their grounds. But a few remained intact, guarded by high walls and iron gates, their original grandeur preserved by families whose money had survived the boom and bust cycles of the 20th century. Number 47 Larkspur Lane was one of these survivors. Marcus parked his unmarked sedan at the corner of Larkspur and Thornwood, approximately 100 meters from the property's main entrance. From this vantage point, he could observe the house without being observed, or so he hoped. The first thing he noticed was the wall. It was constructed of dark gray stone, each block cut with precision and fitted together without visible mortar. The wall was perhaps 3 meters high, topped with iron spikes that had been forged to resemble thorned vines. In another context, the decoration might have been whimsical. Here, against the gray sky, it looked like a warning. The gate was wrought iron, black and heavy, with vertical bars that were too close together for a man to slip between. There was no visible intercom or call box, no obvious way for visitors to announce their presence. Marcus assumed there must be some kind of surveillance system. A man of Smith's wealth and reclusiveness would not leave his entrance unguarded, but he could not see the cameras. Beyond the gate, a gravel driveway curved through a landscaped garden before disappearing behind a screen of mature hedges. The house itself was partially visible over the hedge line, a Victorian mansion in the Italianate style, 3 stories of red brick with white trim and a tower at the northeast corner. The windows were dark despite the gray sky, their glass reflecting the colorless sky. Marcus watched for 20 minutes. In that time, nothing moved. No gardeners tended the grounds, no servants passed before the windows, no vehicles entered or exited the property. The house stood in absolute stillness, as if it had been carved from a single block of silence and set down in this wealthy corner of the city. Finally, he started the car and pulled forward, stopping before the iron gate. He rolled down his window, looking for a call button or intercom panel. There was nothing. He waited, uncertain. Then, with a sound like a long-held breath finally released, the gates began to open. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. He had not announced his presence. He had not pressed any button or spoken into any microphone. Yet the gates were opening, swinging inward with a deliberate, mechanical smoothness that suggested they were waiting for him. He was being watched. The realization should have troubled him more than it did. Instead, it confirmed something he had suspected from the moment he first saw the property. Harold Smith was a man who valued control, a man who watched, who waited, who opened doors only when he was ready for what might come through them. Marcus drove slowly up the driveway, his tires crunching on the immaculate white gravel. The hedges parted to reveal a circular drive with a dry fountain at its center, a stone figure of a woman holding an urn, her face worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. The house rose in all its Victorian splendor, larger than it had appeared from the street. He parked near the front door and sat for a moment, studying the facade. The house was beautiful, there was no denying that. It had the craftsmanship of an era when buildings were meant to last for centuries, when architects took pride in details that no one would ever notice, the subtle curve of a window arch, the intricate pattern of brickwork above a doorway, the way the roof lines stepped and angled to create visual interest. It was a house built by people who believed in permanence, in legacy, in the power of wealth to transcend the generations. But there was something else here, something that Marcus could not quite name. It was a feeling more than an observation, a sense that the house was not merely standing, but waiting, that behind those dark windows something was watching his approach with the patient attention of a spider at the center of its web. He got out of the car and walked toward the front door. The entrance was sheltered by a portico supported by 2 marble columns, their surfaces smooth as skin. The door itself was massive, made of oak that had darkened with age to the color of old blood. There was a brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head, its mouth open in a silent roar. He lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound was surprisingly loud, echoing through the portico and fading into the silence beyond. He waited, counting his breaths, watching the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a long-held breath finally released, the gates began to open. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. He had not announced his presence. He had not pressed any button or spoken into any microphone, yet the gates were opening, swinging inward with a deliberate, mechanical smoothness that suggested they were waiting for him. He was being watched. The realization should have troubled him more than it did. Instead, it confirmed something he had suspected from the moment he first saw the property. Harold Smith was a man who valued control, a man who watched, who waited, who opened doors only when he was ready for what might come through them. Marcus drove slowly up the driveway, his tires crunching on the immaculate white gravel. The hedges parted to reveal a circular drive with a dry fountain at its center, a stone figure of a woman holding an urn, her face worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. The house rose in all its Victorian splendor, larger than it had appeared from the street. He parked near the front door and sat for a moment, studying the facade. The house was beautiful, there was no denying that. It had the craftsmanship of an era when buildings were meant to last for centuries, when architects took pride in details that no one would ever notice. The subtle curve of a window arch, the intricate pattern of brickwork above a doorway, the way the roof lines stepped and angled to create visual interest. It was a house built by people who believed in permanence, in legacy, in the power of wealth to transcend the generations. But there was something else here, something that Marcus could not quite name. It was a feeling more than an observation, a sense that the house was not merely standing, but waiting, that behind those dark windows something was watching his approach with the patient attention of a spider at the center of its web. He got out of the car and walked toward the front door. The entrance was sheltered by a portico supported by 2 marble columns, their surfaces smooth as skin. The door itself was massive, made of oak that had darkened with age to the color of old blood. There was a brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head, its mouth open in a silent roar. He lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound was surprisingly loud, echoing through the portico and fading into the silence beyond. He waited, counting his breaths, watching the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a long-held breath finally released, the gates began to open. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. He had not announced his presence. He had not pressed any button or spoken into any microphone, yet the gates were opening, swinging inward with a deliberate, mechanical smoothness that suggested they were waiting for him. He was being watched. The realization should have troubled him more than it did. Instead, it confirmed something he had suspected from the moment he first saw the property. Harold Smith was a man who valued control, a man who watched, who waited, who opened doors only when he was ready for what might come through them. Marcus drove slowly up the driveway, his tires crunching on the immaculate white gravel. The hedges parted to reveal a circular drive with a dry fountain at its center, a stone figure of a woman holding an urn, her face worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. Beyond the fountain, the house rose in all its Victorian splendor, larger than it had appeared from the street. He parked near the front entrance and sat for a moment, studying the facade. The house was beautiful, there was no denying that. It had the craftsmanship of an era when buildings were meant to last for centuries, when architects took pride in details that no one would ever notice, the subtle curve of a window arch, the intricate pattern of brickwork above a doorway, the way the roof lines stepped and angled to create visual interest. It was a house built by people who believed in permanence, in legacy, in the power of wealth to transcend the generations. But there was something else here, something that Marcus could not quite name. It was a feeling, more than an observation, a sense that the house was not merely standing, but waiting, that behind those dark windows, something was watching his approach with the patient attention of a spider at the center of its web. He got out of the car and walked toward the front door. The entrance was sheltered by a portico supported by 2 marble columns, their surfaces smooth as skin. The door itself was massive, made of oak that had darkened with age to the color of old blood. There was a brass knocker in the shape of a lion's head, its mouth open in a silent roar. Marcus lifted the knocker and let it fall. The sound was surprisingly loud, echoing through the portico and fading into the silence beyond. He waited, counting his breaths, watching the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a click that seemed to come from very far away, the door swung open. And Marcus Webb found himself looking into the face of a woman so beautiful that for a fraction of a second he forgot why he had come. Chapter 3. The Woman at the Door. She was younger than he expected, mid-20s perhaps or early 30s, with the kind of timeless beauty that makes age difficult to determine. Her hair was dark, almost black, falling in waves past her shoulders. Her skin was pale, the pallor of someone who spent most of their time indoors, and her eyes were a shade of green that reminded Marcus of deep forest pools, still and dark and full of hidden depths. She wore a simple dress of dove gray, high-necked and long-sleeved, that covered her from throat to ankle. It should have been modest, even severe, but somehow it only emphasized the elegance of her figure, the graceful line of her neck, the delicate architecture of her collarbones. "Good morning," she said, and her voice was low and musical, with the faintest accent that Marcus could not place. "May I help you?" Marcus recovered himself, reaching into his jacket for his badge. "Detective Marcus Webb, Precinct 17. I'm looking for Harold Smith." The woman's lips curved into a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Yes, of course. We've been expecting you." Expecting him? Before he could question this, she stepped back and gestured for him to enter. "Please, come in. She'll be here in a moment." Marcus paused on the threshold. "She?" "Smith," she said, as if this explained everything. He stepped inside, and the house seemed to close around him like a hand. The entrance hall was vast, easily the size of Marcus's apartment, with a marble floor that reflected the light from a chandelier high overhead. The walls were paneled in dark wood, hung with oil paintings in gilded frames, portraits mostly, of men and women in the clothing of earlier centuries. Their eyes seemed to follow Marcus as he moved further into the room. A grand staircase rose from the center of the hall, its banister carved from dark wood and polished to a mirror shine. The stairs curved upward and out of sight, disappearing into the shadowed regions of the upper floors. But what caught Marcus's attention most was not the architectural grandeur or the antique paintings. It was the dolls. They were everywhere. On a mahogany table near the door, a collection of porcelain dolls sat in a careful arrangement, their glass eyes staring outward. On a shelf beside the staircase, more dolls perched, these ones dressed in Victorian clothing, their faces painted with delicate precision. In a glass case against the far wall, yet more dolls were displayed, each one unique, each one eerily lifelike. He counted at least 30 visible from where he stood, and he had the sense that this was only a fraction of the total. "Mr. Smith collects them," the woman said, noticing his gaze. "Has decades. Each one is unique. They're very realistic. That's the point," she said, and something in her voice made Marcus look at her more closely. But her face was smooth, unreadable, as blank as the painted faces of the dolls themselves. "I didn't catch your name." "I'm Mrs. Smith." The statement hung in the air for a moment before Marcus understood its implications. This woman, this young, beautiful woman, was the wife of Harold Smith, who, according to the case file, is 73 years old. "I see," Marcus said, keeping his voice neutral. "And Mr. Smith?" "Harold is upstairs. He moves slowly these days. He'll join us shortly." She gestured toward a doorway on the right side of the hall. "Please, wait in the sitting room. I'll bring tea." Before Marcus could respond, she had disappeared through another doorway, her footsteps silent on the marble floor. He was alone in the entrance hall, surrounded by the unblinking gazes of painted eyes. He walked toward the sitting room, but paused beside the table near the door. The dolls there were particularly detailed, their faces painted with subtle variations in color that suggested real skin, their hair, actual human hair, he realized with a start, styled in different fashions. Each one wore different clothing, from elaborate Victorian dresses to simple modern attire, and each one had a different face. Unique faces, as Mrs. Smith had said, not the generic prettiness of mass-produced dolls, but individual features, individual expressions, individual personalities, captured in paint and porcelain and glass. Marcus leaned closer, studying the nearest doll. It was a young woman with chestnut hair and a splash of freckles across her nose. She was dressed in a cardigan and jeans, casual clothes for a casual walk. Her eyes were the color of weak tea, and her lips were curved in a slight smile, as if she found the world endlessly amusing. Marcus knew that face. He had studied it for months, had memorized every feature, had dreamed of it in the restless hours between midnight and dawn. It was Caddy Morrison. For a long moment he could not move. He stood before the doll, his heart pounding against his ribs, his breath coming shallow and fast. This was impossible. This was... A sound behind him made him spin around. The woman, Mrs. Smith, had returned, carrying a silver tea tray. She set it on a side table and looked at him with her deep green eyes, her expression curious but not alarmed. "I see you've found Cadence." "You know who this is?" "Of course. Harold knows all of them." Marcus felt his training reasserting itself, the cold logic of investigation pressing down the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Mrs. Smith, I need to speak to your husband immediately. This doll is beautiful, isn't it? Harold's finest work, I think. He captured something essential in her, don't you agree? Something about the eyes." Marcus stepped toward her. "Mrs. Smith, this doll bears an exact resemblance to a missing person, a woman named Cadence Morrison, who disappeared 7 months ago. I need to know how—" He stopped, because as he moved, as his footsteps disturbed the stillness of the entrance hall, the dolls on the table began to move. Not walking, not turning their heads, nothing so dramatic. They simply fell. One by one, as if pushed by invisible hands, the dolls toppled from their places. They tumbled to the floor with soft, muffled sounds, cloth bodies hitting marble, porcelain limbs clicking together, glass eyes staring up at the chandelier with expressions that seemed in that moment to hold something like fear. Marcus froze, watching the cascade of falling dolls with a disbelief that bordered on horror. When the last doll had fallen, the silence that filled the hall was absolute. Mrs. Smith smiled, and for the first time Marcus saw something behind her eyes, not emptiness, but something else, something knowing, something old. This is what happens when someone new comes, you see. They sense it. They sense the change. Marcus looked at the fallen dolls, at their scattered limbs and twisted poses, at their glass eyes that seemed to catch the light and hold it, and he felt, for the first time since entering this house, truly afraid. Chapter 4. The Man Who Knew Too Much. "Detective Webb?" The voice came from the top of the staircase, and Marcus looked up to see a figure descending with the careful, measured steps of age. Harold Smith was a tall man, made taller by the impeccable posture he maintained despite his 73 years. His hair was white and thick, swept back from a high forehead, and his face was a map of fine lines that suggested character rather than decay. He wore a smoking jacket of dark burgundy velvet over a white shirt, and his eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, held a light that Marcus found impossible to read. Intelligence, he thought, or something else, something deeper. "Mr. Smith," Marcus said, straightening to his full height, "thank you for seeing me." "I've been expecting you," Smith said, reaching the bottom of the stairs, "though I confess I expected you sooner. The Morrison girl disappeared 7 months ago, and I live barely 300 meters from where her phone signal ended. It seems a rather obvious connection." "You know about Cadence Morrison?" "I make it my business to know things, Detective. It's a habit I developed long ago and never quite managed to break." He glanced at the fallen dolls without apparent concern. "I see you've caused a disturbance in my collection." Marcus turned to look at the scattered figures. Mrs. Smith was already kneeling beside them, carefully lifting each one and returning it to its place with the tenderness one might show to sleeping children. "I didn't touch them," Marcus said. "No, of course not. They fell of their own accord." Smith's lips curved into a slight smile. "They always do, when someone new comes. It's a curious phenomenon. I've studied it for years without arriving at a satisfactory explanation." "You're saying the dolls move on their own?" "I'm saying they fall when strangers enter the house. Whether they move or are moved, I cannot say. The distinction may be less important than it appears. Shall we talk in more comfortable surroundings? My wife has prepared tea." They walked through the doorway into a room that seemed designed to overwhelm the senses. Every surface was covered with objects: antique clocks, Chinese vases, crystal figurines, leather-bound books, carved ivory pieces, and more. Dolls. Always more dolls. They perched on shelves and tables, nestled in corners and alcoves, their glass eyes following the movement of the living with silent attention. 2 armchairs faced each other before a marble fireplace where a small fire burned despite the relative warmth of the morning. Marcus took the chair that faced the door, a habit born from training, and Smith lowered himself into the opposite seat with the care of a man who knew his body's limitations. Mrs. Smith entered with the tea tray and set it on the table between them. She poured 2 cups without asking for preferences, handed one to Marcus and one to her husband, then withdrew to a chair by the window, where she sat in silence, her hands folded in her lap, her green eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the glass. Marcus watched her for a moment, trying to read her expression, but her face was as blank as stone. "My wife is somewhat introverted," Smith said, following his gaze. "She prefers observation to participation, a quality I find restful after the noise of my earlier marriages." "Earlier marriages?" "Yes, I've been married 4 times. My first wife died in childbirth. My second died of influenza in the epidemic of 1988. Yes, there was a small outbreak, though the newspapers didn't report it. My third wife—" He paused, and something flickered across his face, too quickly for Marcus to identify. "My third wife left, or rather she ceased to exist in the manner that she had existed. It's a complicated story." "And your current wife?" "Evelyn. We've been married for 3 years. She is—" He smiled, and the expression seemed genuine. "She is everything I could have wished for in a final companion. Patient, beautiful, understanding of my eccentricities." Marcus set down his teacup. "Mr. Smith, I'm here about the disappearances." "Yes, I gathered as much." 5 people have gone missing in the vicinity of your property over the past 2 years. One of them, Cadence Morrison, disappeared less than a quarter mile from your front gate. I'm aware of the geography, Detective. And you have a doll in your entrance hall that bears an exact likeness to her." Smith's pale eyes met Marcus's without wavering. "I have many dolls that bear likenesses to many people. It's the nature of my collection. I commission artists to create figures based on photographs, descriptions, sometimes even living models. Over 40 years, I've accumulated quite a variety." "You commissioned a doll that looks exactly like a missing woman?" "I commissioned a doll that looks like a young woman I saw walking past my property one evening, approximately 8 months ago. She had an interesting face, unusual coloring, and expressive quality. I took a photograph from my window and sent it to my craftsman in Prague. He does excellent work. You photographed her without her knowledge. She was on a public street. There's no law against photography in public spaces. Smith took a sip of his tea. I understand your suspicion, Detective. It must seem strange, perhaps even sinister, but I assure you my interest in Miss Morrison was purely aesthetic. I never spoke to her, never approached her, never had any contact with her whatsoever. And yet she disappeared less than a month after you photographed her. Correlation is not causation, Detective. Certainly they taught you that at the police academy. Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Smith, I'm not here to play games. A woman is missing. Her family is suffering. If you know anything— Why do people disappear? Smith interrupted, and his voice was different now. Softer, more thoughtful, almost philosophical. Have you ever considered that question, Detective? Not the mechanics of it, but the meaning. Why do people simply stop existing in the world? I don't. Some disappear because they want to. They grow tired of their lives, their families, their obligations, and they walk away. They become new people in new cities, living new lives that have nothing to do with what they left behind. This is the most common reason, though the families never want to believe it. Smith set down his cup and steepled his fingers before his face. Others disappear because someone makes them disappear. Murder, abduction, human trafficking. The newspapers are full of such stories. These are the cases that detectives like yourself are trained to solve. And the rest? The rest— Smith's pale eyes seemed to deepen, to fill with shadows that had nothing to do with the lighting in the room. The rest disappear because they discover something they weren't meant to discover. They see something they weren't meant to see. They step across a threshold that cannot be uncrossed, and they find themselves in a place where the old rules no longer apply. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed the hour. Mr. Smith, Marcus said slowly, are you confessing to something? I'm observing something, Detective. There's a difference. Smith rose from his chair and walked to a cabinet against the far wall. I spent 40 years collecting antiquities, Detective, objects of power, objects of mystery, objects that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Most of them were exactly what they appeared to be, beautiful artifacts with interesting histories. But some— he opened the box— some were something more. Marcus stood, every instinct telling him to be careful, to maintain control of the situation. But he found himself drawn forward, toward the box, toward the light that emanated from within. What is that? Smith lifted the object from the box. It was a stone, perhaps the size of a large marble, but shaped like a rough diamond. Its surface was translucent, and light seemed to move within it, not reflecting from it, but genuinely moving, swirling like liquid fire trapped in crystal. This, said Harold Smith, is the answer to questions you haven't thought to ask yet. Chapter 5. The Conversation That Changed Everything. Marcus stood before the stone, unable to look away. The light inside it was mesmerizing. It pulsed with rhythms that seemed to match his heartbeat, seemed to respond to his attention, seemed to know that he was watching. What is it? He asked again, his voice hushed. I call it the Stone of Becoming, Smith said. A name I invented myself, as its original name was in a language that no longer exists. I acquired it from a dealer in Istanbul, who acquired it from a tomb robber in Syria, who found it in a burial chamber that predates recorded history. It's beautiful, he said. It is, but beauty is the least of its qualities. Smith held the stone up to the light, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to fill with its glow. This stone, Detective, has the power to transform. Transform? What do you mean? I mean precisely what I say. This stone can transform one thing into another, but not in the way you might imagine, not lead into gold or water into wine. This stone transforms identity. It transforms the very essence of what a person is. Marcus felt a laugh building in his chest, the reflexive response of a rational mind to an irrational claim. But the sound died in his throat as he looked into Smith's pale eyes and saw nothing. No jest, no deception, only the calm certainty of a man stating observable fact. That's impossible. Is it? You've spent your career investigating things that seem impossible until you find the explanation. Locked room murders, vanishing bodies, perpetrators who seem to have been in two places at once. The impossible becomes possible once you understand the mechanism. Smith set the stone on the table between them. Even at rest, it continued to glow, its internal light casting strange shadows on the walls. The mechanism of this stone is simple in principle. Whoever holds it, whoever focuses their will upon it, can take on the form of any person they choose. Not a disguise, not makeup and prosthetics and careful imitation. True transformation. They become, in every physical sense, the person they wish to become. Every physical sense? Appearance, voice, even the subtleties of movement and mannerisms. The transformation is complete and undetectable. Not even a lover could tell the difference. Mrs. Smith stirred by the window, her hands unfolding in her lap. Marcus glanced at her, but her expression remained unchanged, her eyes still fixed on that distant point beyond the glass. Assuming any of this is true, Marcus said carefully, what does it have to do with the missing persons, with Cadence Morrison? That, detective, is a complicated answer. Smith sat back down, his movements slow and deliberate. The stone's power is not without cost. Every transformation takes something from the user, a fragment of their original self, a piece of who they were before the change. The more often one uses the stone, the less of their original identity remains. You're saying the stone consumes people? In a manner of speaking, it doesn't destroy them, not in the way you might think. Their consciousness continues, their memories persist, but their original form, their original face, their original voice, their original identity, these become increasingly distant. Eventually, they can no longer remember who they were. They exist only as the person they last became. The fire had burned low, and the room was growing cold despite the morning sun outside. Marcus felt the chill seeping into his bones, felt a dread that went deeper than temperature. The dolls, he said slowly, the ones that look like real people. Smith's expression did not change, but something in his eyes, some flicker of acknowledgement, told Marcus that he was on the right track. The dolls are memory, detective. They are the only thing that remains of those who use the stone too often. When a person loses themselves entirely, when they can no longer remember their original form, they crystallize. They become fixed, permanent, a perfect replica of their final appearance, frozen forever in porcelain and glass. Marcus's mind was reeling. This was insane. This was the fantasy of a deluded old man. And yet, the doll in the entrance hall had Caddy Morrison's face. And yet, the dolls fell when he entered the house. And yet, something in this room, something in the air, in the light, in the presence of that glowing stone, felt more real than anything he had ever experienced. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you came here looking for truth, detective, and truth is something I respect, even when it's dangerous." He leaned forward, his pale eyes intense. "You want to know what happened to Cadence Morrison. You want to know what happened to all of them, the 27 faces on your board, the ones you've studied and memorized and dreamed about. I can tell you, but once I do, you can never unknow it. Tell me." Smith smiled, and it was a sad smile, a tired smile, the smile of a man who had carried knowledge too heavy for too long. "They found the stone, detective, one way or another. They learned of its existence and came here seeking it. Some wanted power, some wanted escape, some simply wanted to be someone other than who they were, and the stone gave them what they wanted, for a time, but they couldn't stop. The temptation was too great, the pull too strong. They used it again and again, becoming person after person, until they lost themselves entirely. And then they became dolls? They became what the stone made of them, permanent, perfect, no longer troubled by the confusion of identity, the burden of choice, just beautiful objects, forever preserved, forever remembered. Marcus looked at the stone on the table. Its light pulsed softly, invitingly, like a heart waiting to be held. "You expect me to believe this." "I expect nothing, detective. I simply offer you the truth. What you do with it is your choice." Silence fell over the room. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. The dolls on their shelves watched with glass eyes that seemed, in the uncertain light, almost alive. Marcus thought of Caddy Morrison, of her tea-colored eyes and her amused smile, of her family, waiting for news that would never come, of the 26 other faces on his board, each one representing a life interrupted, a story left unfinished. "If what you're saying is true," he said finally, "then you're responsible for their disappearances. You gave them access to the stone. You let them destroy themselves." "I gave them a choice," Smith replied, "nothing more. They made their own decisions, as all of us do. I cannot be held responsible for the consequences of choices freely made." "You could have hidden the stone, destroyed it." "Could I?" Smith's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Have you never encountered something so powerful, so seductive, that you knew you could never truly let it go? The stone has been with me for 40 years, detective. It is a part of me now. To destroy it would be to destroy myself." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. And then Mrs. Smith spoke for the first time since she had introduced herself at the door. "He's lying." Chapter 6. Cracks in the Facade. Marcus turned to face her. She had risen from her chair by the window and was standing now in the center of the room, her pale face flushed with something that might have been anger or fear, or both. "Evelyn," Smith said, and there was a warning in his voice. "He tells you the stone consumes people. He tells you they become dolls of their own free will." Her green eyes were bright, almost feverish. "He tells you he's innocent, just a collector, just a bystander, just a man who happened to possess something powerful. Evelyn, this is not the time. The truth is something else, detective." She stepped toward Marcus, and he saw that her hands were trembling. "The truth is that Harold chooses who uses the stone. He selects them, he lures them, he makes them believe they're in control, and then he takes everything from them." Smith rose from his chair, and for the first time Marcus saw anger in his pale eyes. "My wife has a tendency toward melodrama. It's one of her less charming qualities. He's been doing this for decades, detective, longer than you can imagine. He's not 73 years old, detective. He's not even human anymore. The stone has made him something else, something that feeds on identity, that collects people like specimens in a museum." "Evelyn, that's enough." "Is it?" She turned to face her husband, and Marcus saw something pass between them, a current of history, of secrets, of a relationship far more complicated than he had imagined. "He asked why I married you, Harold. Maybe it's time I told him the truth." Smith's face went pale, not with fear, Marcus thought, but with a terrible, controlled rage. "You wouldn't dare." "I married him," Evelyn said, turning back to Marcus, "because I had no choice, because I was already his in a way that you can't understand, because 20 years ago I was someone else entirely, a woman named Sarah Blackwood, who made the mistake of being curious about a beautiful stone in an old man's house." Marcus felt the floor shift beneath his feet. You used the stone?" I used it once, just once, to become someone else for an hour, to escape the life I was living, to feel what it was like to be beautiful and wealthy and free of worry." Her voice broke. "And when I tried to change back, when I tried to become Sarah again, I couldn't. I was trapped. I was Evelyn now, whoever Evelyn had been. And Harold." She laughed, and it was a terrible sound. "Harold found me useful, a young wife to replace the old one, a convenient explanation for his immortality. Every few decades he takes a new form, claims a new identity. His wives age, but he never does, because he keeps becoming them, keeps absorbing their youth, keeps adding them to his collection when they're no longer useful." Smith was very still. His pale eyes had gone dark, all light extinguished. "My wife is hysterical. She has been under considerable strain lately, and I'm afraid it has affected her mental state. Look at the dolls, Detective." Evelyn was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Look at their faces. Every one of them was a person. Every one of them was lured here, seduced by the promise of the stone, and then consumed when they had nothing left to give." Marcus looked at the dolls. In the uncertain light, their glass eyes seemed to shimmer, their painted lips seemed to tremble, their frozen poses seemed, for just a moment, to suggest movement, reaching hands, turning heads, mouths opening in silent screams. And he understood, in a flash of terrible clarity, that Evelyn was telling the truth. He reached for his gun, but Smith was faster. The old man moved with a speed that should have been impossible for someone of his apparent age. His hand closed around Marcus's wrist before he could draw the weapon, and his grip was iron, cold and strong and utterly unyielding. "You shouldn't have come here, Detective Webb. You shouldn't have asked questions. You shouldn't have listened to my wife's ravings. Let me go." "I'm afraid that's no longer possible." Smith's free hand reached for the stone on the table. "You see, Detective Webb, the stone requires a particular kind of fuel to function. It doesn't work with just anyone. It needs people who are substantial, people with strong identities, clear senses of self, people like you." Marcus struggled, but Smith's grip only tightened. He could feel the bones in his wrist grinding together, could feel the circulation being cut off. "There's no need for violence, no need for fear. The transformation is quite painless, I assure you. You'll simply become someone else, and then when you've been someone else for long enough, you'll become something permanent, something beautiful, something eternal." He lifted the stone, and its light filled the room. "Welcome to my collection, Detective Webb." Chapter 7. The Seduction of Another Self. The stone was warm in Smith's hand, warmer than it had any right to be, given that it had been sitting on a wooden table in a room with a dying fire. It pulsed with that inner light, that liquid fire, and Marcus found himself unable to look away. "Don't," he said, but his voice was weak, distant, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a deep well. "Please don't." Everyone begs in the beginning. Smith's grip on his wrist relaxed slightly, though he did not release it entirely. "It's a natural response to the unknown. But I'm not going to hurt you, Detective. Quite the opposite. I'm going to give you a gift." "I don't want your gift." "You don't know what it is yet." Smith smiled, and in the light of the stone, his face seemed younger somehow, the lines fading, the skin tightening, as if time itself were running backward. "The stone doesn't just transform the body, Detective. It transforms the mind. It allows you to experience what it truly means to be someone else, not just to wear their face, but to feel their feelings, think their thoughts, live their life from the inside." Despite himself, despite the fear that coiled in his stomach like a living thing, Marcus felt a flicker of curiosity. He had spent 18 years trying to understand other people, to get inside the minds of killers and victims, to comprehend the motivations that drove human behavior. What would it be like to truly become someone else, to feel what they felt, to know what they knew? I can see it in your eyes. The hunger for understanding. It's what makes you good at your job, detective. It's also what will destroy you if you're not careful. And if I refuse? You can't refuse. That's the beauty of it. Smith released Marcus's wrist and stepped back, still holding the stone. Oh, I could force you. The stone's power is not limited to the willing, but force is crude, unsatisfying. I prefer persuasion. He gestured toward the doorway, and Marcus became aware that Mrs. Smith, Evelyn, had left the room. He could hear her footsteps somewhere above them, the creak of floorboards, the sound of a door closing. Your wife. My wife is no longer relevant to this conversation. She has played her part, the role of the frightened victim, the voice of warning. It's a role she plays very well, I must admit. She almost convinces even me sometimes. She was telling the truth. She was telling a truth, one of many possible truths. Smith walked to the window, looking out at the gray sky beyond. The stone does consume, detective. She was right about that. But consumption is not the same as destruction. The people who become my dolls are not gone. They're preserved, protected, safe from the entropy that claims all living things. They're frozen. They're trapped. They're eternal. Smith turned back to face him. In a world where everything dies, where everyone ages and decays and is eventually forgotten, Cadence Morrison will still exist, beautiful, perfect, unchanged. That's not existence. That's a living death. Is it? How would you know, detective? Have you ever experienced eternity? Have you ever tasted what it means to transcend the limitations of flesh and time? Smith walked back toward him, the stone still glowing in his palm. Take it. Hold it. Think of someone you know, someone whose life you've wondered about, whose perspective you've tried to imagine. Focus your will upon them, and the stone will do the rest. Marcus stared at the stone. He thought of all the people whose lives he had tried to understand, the killers, the victims, the witnesses, the families left behind. 18 years of trying to see the world through other eyes, and always falling short, always missing something essential, always trapped in his own perspective, his own limitations. And he thought of Caddy Morrison, of her amused smile and her tea-colored eyes, of the roommate who waited for news, of the parents who had aged a decade in 7 months, of the board of faces that haunted his dreams. If he could understand what happened to her, truly understand, from the inside. He reached for the stone. Smith smiled, and he felt the world tilt beneath him as his fingers closed around the smooth, warm surface of the crystal. Chapter 8. Into the Mirror. The sensation was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. It began as warmth, a gentle heat that spread from his palm, through his arm, into his chest, through his entire body. Then the warmth became something else, a vibration, a frequency, a hum that seemed to originate from somewhere deep inside him. Think of someone, Smith had said. Marcus closed his eyes. The first face that came to mind was Caddy Morrison's, but something held him back, a remnant of caution, a fear of what it might mean to become a woman who had been lost. So he pushed that image aside and reached for another. Harold Smith. The thought came unbidden, but once it was there, Marcus could not dismiss it. Take my form, then go to my wife. You will see she will not understand anything. Had Smith actually said those words, or was Marcus remembering something that hadn't happened yet? Time seemed to be folding in on itself, past and future becoming indistinguishable. It didn't matter, the stone was already responding. Marcus felt his body begin to change. It was not painful, Smith had been truthful about that at least. Instead, it was like melting, like dissolving, like becoming liquid and then reconstituting into something new. He felt his height shifting, his posture realigning, his bones reshaping themselves into a different architecture. His skin tightened and loosened in different places. His hair seemed to grow and recede at the same time. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the transformation was complete. Marcus opened his eyes. The room looked different. Not the furniture or the decor, those were unchanged, but the proportions, the angles, the way light fell across surfaces. He was seeing the world from a different height, through different eyes, with a different brain processing the visual information. He looked down at his hands. They were old hands, thin-skinned and veined, with long fingers and carefully manicured nails. The hands of an antiquarian, the hands of Harold Smith. Fascinating, isn't it? Marcus looked up. Smith, the original Smith, or what appeared to be him, was standing by the fireplace, watching with an expression of mild interest. How... Marcus's voice caught in his throat. It was not his voice anymore. It was Smith's voice, the same cultured, measured tones that had spoken of transformation and eternity. The stone doesn't duplicate, detective. It transforms. While you are me, I am simply waiting. I still exist, but in a suspended state, watching through your eyes, feeling through your senses. When you release the transformation, I will return to my original form, and you will return to yours. Marcus looked around the room, trying to orient himself in this new body. His movements were different, slower, more deliberate, constrained by the physical limitations of age, but his mind was clear, and more than clear, it was enhanced. He could feel Smith's memories pressing at the edges of his consciousness, like dreams half remembered upon waking. This is impossible, and yet it is happening. Smith, or the waiting aspect of Smith, smiled. The stone doesn't operate by the rules of conventional physics, detective. It operates by older rules, deeper rules, rules that existed before science tried to explain the universe. Marcus walked toward the window, feeling the strange sensation of moving in a body that was not his own. The garden outside looked different through Smith's eyes, more detailed, more vibrant, as if decades of accumulated observation had trained these eyes to see things that younger eyes might miss. "The dolls," he said, speaking more to himself than to Smith. "Each one of them experienced this. Each one of them felt what I'm feeling now. Yes." And they kept coming back. They kept using the stone over and over until they couldn't stop. The transformation is addictive, detective. Once you've experienced what it means to be someone else, the limitations of your original self become unbearable. Every life you've ever wondered about, every perspective you've ever wanted to understand, they're all available to you. How could anyone resist that temptation? I understood, standing there in Smith's body, feeling the weight of Smith's years and the breadth of Smith's knowledge. I understood the terrible allure of the stone. To be able to experience any life, to know what it truly meant to be another person, it was the deepest human desire, the wish that lay beneath every act of empathy and imagination. And it was a trap. I want to change back. Of course, simply release the stone and focus on your original form. Marcus looked down at his, Smith's, right hand. The stone was still there, clutched in his aged fingers, glowing with its inner fire. He tried to open his hand to let the crystal fall. His fingers did not move. I can't. Curious. The transformation seems to have progressed further than I anticipated. Smith's voice was still calm, still measured, but there was a new quality to it, something like satisfaction. It happens sometimes with particularly receptive subjects. The stone finds their identity malleable, permeable. It adjusts its grip accordingly. Marcus felt his body begin to change. It was not painful. Smith had been truthful about that, at least. Instead, it was like melting, like dissolving, like becoming liquid and then reconstituting into something new. He felt his height shifting, his posture realigning, his bones reshaping themselves into a different architecture. His skin tightened and loosened in different places. His hair seemed to grow and recede at the same time. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the transformation was complete. Marcus opened his eyes. The room looked different. Not the furniture or the decor, those were unchanged, but the proportions, the angles, the way light fell across surfaces. He was seeing the world from a different height, through different eyes, with a different brain processing the visual information. He looked down at his hands. They were old hands, thin-skinned and veined, with long fingers and carefully manicured nails. The hands of an antiquarian, the hands of Harold Smith. Fascinating, isn't it? Marcus looked up. Smith, the original Smith, or what appeared to be him, was standing by the fireplace, watching with an expression of mild interest. How... Marcus's voice caught in his throat. It was not his voice anymore. It was Smith's voice, the same cultured, measured tones that had spoken of transformation and eternity. The stone doesn't duplicate, detective. It transforms. While you are me, I am simply waiting. I still exist, but in a suspended state, watching through your eyes, feeling through your senses. When you release the transformation, I will return to my original form, and you will return to yours. Marcus looked around the room, trying to orient himself in this new body. His movements were different, slower, more deliberate, constrained by the physical limitations of age. But his mind was clear, and more than clear, it was enhanced. He could feel Smith's memories pressing at the edges of his consciousness, like dreams half remembered upon waking. This is impossible, and yet it is happening. Smith, or the waiting aspect of Smith, smiled. The stone doesn't duplicate, detective. It transforms. While you are me, I am simply waiting. I still exist, but in a suspended state, watching through your eyes, feeling through your senses. When you release the transformation, I will return to my original form, and you will return to yours. Marcus looked around the room, trying to orient himself in this new body. His movements were different, slower, more deliberate, constrained by the physical limitations of age. But his mind was clear, and more than clear, it was enhanced. He could feel Smith's memories pressing at the edges of his consciousness, like dreams half remembered upon waking. This is impossible, and yet it is happening. Smith, or the waiting aspect of Smith, smiled. The stone doesn't duplicate, detective. It transforms. While you are me, I am simply waiting. I still exist, but in a suspended state, watching through your eyes, feeling through your senses. When you release the transformation, I will return to my original form, and you will return to yours. Marcus looked around the room, trying to orient himself in this new body. His movements were different, slower, more deliberate, constrained by the physical limitations of age. But his mind was clear, and more than clear, it was enhanced. He could feel Smith's memories pressing at the... Chapter 9. The Bedroom Door. The hallway on the second floor was darker than the rooms below, a shadowland of closed doors and antique furniture, lit only by the weak gray light that filtered through windows at either end. Marcus moved through it like a man in a dream, his body responding to commands that came from somewhere outside his own will. Third door on the left. He could feel Smith's consciousness inside him now, a presence that was both familiar and alien. It whispered to him, guiding his movements, explaining the geography of the house. Here was the door to the library, where Smith had spent decades reading books in languages that no longer existed. Here was the door to the collection room, where the most valuable dolls were kept, displayed in glass cases like specimens in a museum. And here, at last, was the door to the master bedroom. Marcus stopped before it. His hand, Smith's hand, rested on the polished brass doorknob. Beyond this door, Evelyn waited. Smith's wife, or Sarah Blackwood, as she had once been called, before the stone had stolen her identity and given her a new one. She will not understand anything. The words echoed in Marcus's mind, and he understood now what they meant. Evelyn had been transformed just as he had been transformed. She had forgotten her original self, had become the role she was meant to play. She would look at him, at the body that had been Harold Smith, and see only her husband. She would have no idea that a stranger wore that face. It was a test, a demonstration of the stone's power, and it was also, Marcus realized with dawning horror, a form of entertainment for the real Smith, who was watching from somewhere behind his eyes. He tried to resist. He gathered what remained of his own will and pushed against the compulsion that was driving him forward. For a moment, a single precious moment, he felt his fingers loosen on the doorknob. Then the resistance crumbled, and his hand turned. The door swung open. The bedroom was large and luxurious, decorated in shades of cream and gold that suggested old money and older traditions. A four-poster bed dominated the center of the room, its canopy draped with silk curtains that were partially drawn. A fire burned low in a marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And there, seated at a vanity table before a gilt-framed mirror, was Evelyn. She turned as the door opened, and her eyes, those deep green eyes, met his. "Harold," she said, and her voice was different from before, softer, more intimate, the voice of a wife addressing her husband. "I wondered when you would come." Marcus tried to speak, but the words that came out were not his own. "I always come, my dear, you know that." Evelyn smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Marcus's, Smith's heart race with a mixture of desire and dread. She rose from the vanity and walked toward him, her gray dress flowing around her like water. "The detective was interesting," she said, reaching up to touch his face. Her fingers were cool against his aged skin. "He believed everything you told him, every word. They always do. The curious ones are the easiest to deceive. And now? Now he serves his purpose, like all the others." Evelyn's hand dropped from his face. She turned away, walking toward the window, her back to him. "I remember, you know." Marcus felt a shift in the conversation, a crack in the facade that Smith's consciousness was projecting. "Remember what, my dear?" "Who I was, before." Evelyn looked over her shoulder, and her eyes, for just a moment, seemed to hold a different light, a spark of recognition, a flash of the woman she had once been. "The stone doesn't erase everything, Harold. It just covers it, buries it. But sometimes, in moments like this, I can feel her trying to surface. Sarah, the girl who made a mistake 20 years ago." Marcus felt something stir inside him, not Smith's consciousness, but his own, the detective who had spent 18 years seeking truth, the man who had promised Caddy Morrison's photograph that he would find her. "Sarah," he said, and the name felt strange in Smith's voice. "My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a police detective. I came here to investigate the disappearances, and Smith—" "Stop." The command came from deep inside him, from the part of his mind that Smith had claimed. It was like a hand closing around his throat, cutting off his words. But Evelyn had heard. Her eyes widened, and she turned fully to face him. "Detective Webb? Stop." Marcus fought against the pressure, pushing back with everything he had left. "Yes, I'm inside him. I'm trapped. The stone, he tricked me into using the stone, and now I can't." "Silence." The word was a physical force, slamming into his consciousness like a fist. Marcus staggered backwards, his vision blurring, his sense of self dissolving into the overwhelming presence of Harold Smith. And then, just as he felt himself slipping away entirely, Evelyn's hand closed around his. "I know a way. There's another stone, a counter. Harold keeps it in the tower, in a room he thinks I don't know about, if you can reach it before he takes complete control." Enough! Smith's consciousness rose up like a wave, crashing over Marcus's remaining awareness. The last thing he saw, before the darkness claimed him, was Evelyn's face, pale and frightened and determined, the face of a woman who had been a prisoner for 20 years and had finally found a chance at escape. Then there was only shadow and silence and the slow, terrible sensation of becoming someone else entirely. Chapter 10. The War Within. Darkness. Not the darkness of sleep, where dreams still flicker at the edges of consciousness. Not the darkness of unconsciousness, where time passes unnoticed. This was a different kind of darkness, thick and substantial, pressing against Marcus from all sides like water at the bottom of a deep well. He was aware of himself in fragments. His name, his profession, the faces on the board at Precinct 17, Caddy Morrison's tea-colored eyes. These pieces of identity floated in the darkness like debris after a shipwreck, and he clung to them with desperate intensity. Marcus Webb, detective, 18 years on the force, divorced, 2 children, apartment on 4th Street, coffee with 2 sugars, the smell of his father's pipe tobacco, his mother's voice singing hymns on Sunday mornings. The memories came in flashes, disconnected and fragmentary, but each one was an anchor. Each one was proof that he still existed, that he was still himself despite the overwhelming presence that surrounded him. Harold Smith. The name rose up from the darkness like a creature from deep water, and with it came memories that were not his own. A childhood in this very house decades ago, when the walls were painted different colors and the furniture was new. A father with cold eyes who spoke in quotations from classical texts. A mother who smiled only when guests were present. The loneliness of wealth, the isolation of privilege. Marcus tried to push the memories away, but they kept coming. A young man traveling through Europe, through the Middle East, through territories that would not exist as nations for another half-century. Markets in Istanbul where anything could be purchased for the right price. A tomb in the Syrian desert where ancient things lay waiting for those brave enough or foolish enough to disturb them. The first time holding the stone, the first transformation, the intoxicating rush of becoming someone else, of escaping the prison of Harold Smith's identity for just a moment, just an hour, just long enough to remember what it felt like to be free. Marcus understood in that moment something terrible. Harold Smith had not always been a monster. He had been a lonely child who grew into a lonely man, searching for connection in the only way he knew how. The stone had been his answer, a way to experience other lives, to escape his own limitations, to feel what it meant to be part of the larger human tapestry. But the stone was not a gift. It was a trap. More transformations, more identities, more lives consumed and discarded like empty shells. The slow erosion of Harold Smith's original self replaced piece by piece with fragments of the people he had become. A patchwork consciousness held together by will and habit and the terrible gravity of the stone's power. Marcus felt his own identity beginning to fragment, beginning to blend with the vast archive of Smith's accumulated selves. He was losing himself, he realized. Every moment that passed, every memory of Smith's that infiltrated his mind pushed his own memories further away. He had to fight. He had to remember. Caddy Morrison. He focused on her face, on the photograph he had studied for 7 months. The chestnut hair, the freckles, the amused smile. She had been a person, a full, complex, living person with hopes and dreams and a future that had been stolen from her. What happened to you, Caddy? How did you end up as a doll in Smith's collection?
And then, as if the question itself had opened a door, he saw.
Chapter 11. The Memory of Caddy Morrison. The vision came in fragments, like a film projected through a shattered lens. A young woman walking down Larkspur Lane on an autumn evening. She is wearing a cardigan and jeans, casual clothes for a casual walk. Her phone is in her pocket, playing music through wireless earbuds. She is thinking about her thesis, something about archival practices in the digital age, and she is not paying attention to her surroundings. Marcus felt himself drawn into the memory, becoming an observer in a scene that had played out 7 months ago. He could not affect what he was seeing, could not change the outcome, could only watch as events unfolded with the terrible inevitability of history. Caddy pauses before the iron gate of number 47 Larkspur Lane. Something has caught her attention, a light in one of the windows perhaps, or a sound that pierced through the music in her ears. She removes one earbud and listens. Singing. A woman's voice, high and pure, singing a melody that seems to come from another century. The sound is beautiful and strange, and somehow compelling, drawing Caddy toward the gate like a moth to flame. She hesitates. She knows she should keep walking, should return to her apartment and her roommate and the ordinary concerns of her ordinary life. But the singing is so beautiful, and the gate, hadn't it been closed a moment ago? The gate is swinging open, revealing the gravel driveway and the hedges and the house beyond. Caddy walks through. Marcus wanted to scream at her to stop, to turn back, to run. But the memory was already recorded, already fixed, already beyond any possibility of change. The house is quiet when she reaches it. The singing has stopped, replaced by a silence so complete that it seems to have weight and texture. Caddy climbs the steps to the front door, which stands slightly ajar, and pushes it open. The entrance hall is lit by candles, dozens of them, arranged on every surface, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And there, in the center of the hall, stands a young woman in a gray dress. "Hello," the woman says, and her smile is welcoming. "I've been waiting for you." I heard singing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding. This house has been waiting for you for a very long time." Caddy should run. Every instinct tells her to run, but her feet won't move, and her voice won't work, and the woman in the gray dress is walking toward her with that beautiful, terrible smile. "My name is Evelyn. Won't you come in?" The memory shifted, fragmented, reformed. Caddy is now in the sitting room, holding a cup of tea she doesn't remember accepting. An old man sits across from her, his pale eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that makes her skin crawl. "You're a student of archives," he says. "It is not a question. You study the preservation of memory." "How did you know that?" "I know many things. It's one of the advantages of age." He smiles, and the expression does nothing to warm his cold eyes. "Tell me, Miss Morrison, if you could experience any life from the archives you study, any moment from history preserved in the records you catalog, would you do it?" I don't understand." "It's a simple question. If you could step out of your own life and into another, see through their eyes, feel what they felt, know what they knew, would you take that opportunity?" Caddy didn't answer. She was thinking of her grandmother, who died when she was 12, of the letters she found in the attic, written in faded ink, describing a life she never knew. Of how desperately she had wished, reading those letters, to understand what her grandmother had experienced, what she had felt, who she had truly been. "Yes," she whispered, "I would." Smith's smile widened. "Then let me show you something extraordinary." The memory accelerated now, compressing hours into moments. The stone in Smith's hand, its inner light pulsing like a heartbeat. Caddy's fascination overcoming her fear. Her fingers closing around the crystal. The transformation. She became her grandmother first,
a young woman in 1952, standing in a kitchen that Caddy recognized from photographs, feeling the weight of responsibilities she had never known. Then she became her mother, as a child, running through a backyard that no longer existed. Then she became someone she had never met, a woman from the archives, a suffragist from 1912, marching through streets that had been paved over and forgotten. The transformations came faster and faster, each one shorter, each one more intoxicating. Caddy lost track of how many times she had changed, how many lives she had borrowed, how many identities had flowed through her like water through a sieve. And then, at some point, she tried to return to herself. She couldn't. She could no longer remember what Caddy Morrison looked like. She could no longer recall the sound of her own voice, the rhythm of her own thoughts, the particular way she moved through the world. She was a collection of fragments, a mosaic of stolen identities, and the piece that had been Caddy was missing. "It happens to everyone," Smith said, his voice coming from somewhere far away. "The stone takes what it needs. But don't worry, you'll simply crystallize, become permanent, become beautiful." Caddy tried to scream, but she had no voice. She tried to run, but she had no body. She felt herself hardening, solidifying, becoming still and cold and eternal. And then there was only the glass case and the porcelain face and the fixed expression of a doll that would sit on a shelf forever, watching visitors come and go, unable to warn them, unable to speak, unable to do anything but remember. The memory dissolved, and Marcus found himself alone in the darkness once more. But something had changed. He understood now. He understood what the stone truly was, what Smith truly was, what this house had been for decades. It was not a home, but a trap, not a collection, but a harvest. Smith lured the curious, the lonely, the desperate, anyone with a desire to be someone other than themselves, and the stone did the rest. And Marcus was next, unless he could find a way to escape. "The tower," Evelyn had said. "There's another stone, a counter." Marcus focused his will, pushing against the boundaries of the darkness that surrounded him. He could feel Smith's consciousness nearby, a vast and ancient presence that watched his struggles with something like amusement. But he could also feel his own body somewhere beyond the darkness, the body that wore Smith's form, the flesh that was waiting for whoever claimed it. He pushed harder, and slowly, painfully, he began to rise. Chapter 12. The Body Returns. Marcus opened his eyes. He was standing in the second-floor hallway, his hand still resting on the doorknob of the master bedroom. The door was closed now, and he had no memory of closing it. Evelyn was gone, back inside the room presumably, though he could not hear any sound from beyond the door. How much time had passed? Minutes? Hours? The light filtering through the windows at either end of the hall was different, dimmer, grayer, suggesting that afternoon had given way to evening. He lifted his hand from the doorknob and stared at it. Still Smith's hand, still old and skin-thin, with prominent veins and carefully manicured nails. The transformation was holding, despite everything. But something else had changed. The overwhelming presence of Smith's consciousness, which had been crushing him moments ago, had retreated. It was still there. He could feel it lurking at the edges of his awareness, a shadow in the corners of his mind, but it was no longer in control. Whatever had happened during his struggle in the darkness, whatever he had done to push himself back to the surface, had weakened Smith's hold. For now. The tower, he thought. I need to find the tower. He remembered what Evelyn had said. There was a counterstone, something that could reverse the transformation, and Smith kept it in a room in the tower that he thought his wife didn't know about. It was his only chance. Marcus moved down the hallway, his steps slow and deliberate in Smith's aged body. He tried to remember the layout of the house as he had observed it from outside, the main structure of the Victorian mansion, with a tower rising from the northeast corner. The tower should be accessible from the second floor, probably through a door at the end of one of the corridors. He passed the doors that Smith's memories had identified, the library, the collection room, other spaces he did not want to explore, and turned a corner into a narrower hallway. The decor here was simpler, less ornate, as if this part of the house was not meant for visitors. The carpet was worn, the wallpaper faded, the sconces on the walls dark and cobwebbed. At the end of this hallway was a door. Unlike the other doors in the house, this one was made of iron, with rivets and hinges that looked like they belonged in a medieval castle rather than a Victorian mansion. There was no visible lock, no keyhole, no handle, just a flat panel of cold metal set into the wall. Marcus approached it. Smith's memories, he thought. He must know how to open this. He closed his eyes and reached into the foreign landscape of his borrowed mind. The memories were there, vast and chaotic, a lifetime of experiences jumbled together like books fallen from shelves. He sorted through them, searching for anything related to the tower, the door, the counterstone. And then he found it. A young man, Harold Smith as he had been 60 years ago, standing before this same door. In his hand, the stone of becoming. He presses it against the iron surface, and the door swings silently open. Marcus looked down at his hand. The stone was no longer there. He must have dropped it at some point during his struggle with Smith's consciousness, left it behind in the sitting room, or the hallway, or somewhere else in this labyrinthine house. He needed the stone to open the door. But the stone was also what was trapping him in this form, binding him to Smith's identity. If he retrieved it, if he held it again, would Smith's consciousness surge back and overwhelm him once more? There was no choice. He had to risk it. Marcus turned back the way he had come.
Chapter 13. The Search. The house was different in the evening light. The candles in the entrance hall had been lit, filling the space with flickering shadows that made the dolls on their shelves seem to move. Marcus paused at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the collection below, dozens of frozen faces, each one a person who had once been curious, once been alive, once been foolish enough to trust Harold Smith. Caddy Morrison's doll was not visible from this angle, hidden behind a curve of the staircase, but Marcus knew she was there, watching with glass eyes that might, if Evelyn was to be believed, still hold some fragment of consciousness. He descended the stairs slowly, his hands gripping the polished banister for support. Smith's body was weaker than he had realized, its muscles atrophied as years of careful, limited movement. Every step required effort, concentration, the deliberate application of will. The sitting room was empty when he reached it. The fire had been banked, reduced to glowing embers that cast a reddish light across the antique furniture. The tea service was still on the table, cold now, the cups untouched since he and Smith had faced each other across them hours ago. The stone was not there. Marcus searched the room methodically, behind the chairs, under the tables, in the crevices between cushions. Nothing. He moved to the entrance hall and searched there as well, his hands trembling with urgency as he checked every surface, every shadow, every corner where a small object might have rolled. Still nothing. He took it, Marcus realized. Smith, the real Smith, wherever he is, took the stone back. But that didn't make sense. If Smith had the stone, if he was in control of it, why hadn't he simply forced Marcus out of his body? Why allow the possession to continue at all? Unless Smith wanted Marcus to continue wearing his form.
unless this was all part of some larger plan, some deeper game that Marcus couldn't yet see. The thought was chilling, but Marcus pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to speculate about Smith's motivations. He needed to focus on what he could control, finding the stone, reaching the tower, escaping this house before the transformation became permanent. Evelyn, he thought, she knows more than she's saying. She's been in this house for 20 years. She must know where Smith keeps his treasures. He climbed the stairs again, returning to the second floor, to the door of the master bedroom. This time, he did not hesitate. He knocked. Silence. He knocked again. Still nothing. Marcus tried the handle. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open. The bedroom was empty. The candles that had been burning earlier were now extinguished, their wax pooled on the vanity table where Evelyn had been sitting. The bed was made, its silk canopy perfectly arranged, showing no sign that anyone had occupied it recently. Evelyn was gone, but she had left something behind. On the vanity table, beside the pools of hardened wax, was a piece of paper. Marcus crossed the room and picked it up, his borrowed eyes struggling to make out the handwriting in the dim light. Detective Webb. If you're reading this, you survived the first battle. Smith is strong, but he's not invincible. I've seen him lose before, 3 times in 20 years, and each time he retreated to recover his strength. He'll come for you again, soon. You need to reach the tower before he does. The stone you're looking for is called the Stone of Unmaking. It's the opposite of the one you held. Where that stone transforms, this one restores. Smith has kept it hidden for decades because he knows it's the only thing that can undo what he's become. The tower door can only be opened by the Stone of Becoming, the one that trapped you, but I know where Smith keeps it when he's not using it. There's a safe in the library, behind a portrait of his father. The combination is his mother's birthday, October 17, 1892, 10/17/92. I can't help you anymore. He's watching me too closely, and if he suspects that I'm working against him, he'll add me to the collection. But I'll do what I can to buy you time. Find the stone, open the tower, save yourself. And when you're free, remember my real name. Sarah. Marcus read the notes twice, committing every word to memory. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into the pocket of Smith's smoking jacket. The library, the portrait, the safe. He had a chance, a slim one, but a chance. He moved toward the door and stopped, because there, in the doorway, blocking his exit, stood Harold Smith.
Chapter 14. Face to Face. Remarkable. Smith's voice, his own voice, Marcus realized, the voice he was also wearing, filled the bedroom with its cultured tones. The old man stood in the doorway with perfect composure, his pale eyes reflecting the moonlight that filtered through the windows behind Marcus. I've had many people try to resist the transformation, Smith continued, stepping into the room with the measured grace of someone who had all the time in the world. Some lasted hours, a few lasted days, but none of them ever made it this far. None of them ever found an ally in my own household. Evelyn, Marcus said. Sarah, as she apparently prefers now. Smith's smile was thin and humorless. 20 years of carefully constructed identity, and she throws it away for a stranger. I suppose I should feel betrayed, but mostly I'm just disappointed. Where is she? Somewhere safe. She won't be interfering again. Smith reached into the pocket of his jacket, identical to the one Marcus was wearing, creating a surreal mirror effect, and withdrew the Stone of Becoming. Its light filled the room, turning shadows into dancing shapes on the walls. Looking for this? Marcus felt his heart, Smith's heart, hammering against his ribs. The stone was right there, close enough to touch, but Smith was between him and the door, and in his current body, with its aged muscles and limited stamina, he had no hope of overpowering the man who actually knew how to use this form. "I have a question for you, detective. A philosophical question, if you'll indulge me. What makes a person who they are?" "I don't have time for philosophy." "On the contrary, you have nothing but time. The transformation is irreversible now. You've worn my form too long, absorbed too many memories. Even if you reached the stone of unmaking, even if you held it in your hands and wished with all your heart to be Marcus Webb again, you would find that Marcus Webb no longer exists. You are Harold Smith now, detective. The only question is whether you'll accept that reality gracefully or fight it uselessly until you crystallize." "I don't believe you." "I know. That's what makes this so entertaining." Smith walked to the window and looked out at the darkened garden below. "I was like you, once, centuries ago when I was still young, truly young, not just wearing a young man's face. I resisted the stone with everything I had. I fought to retain my original identity, to remember who I had been before the transformations began." "Centuries? Did you think I was exaggerating when I said I wasn't human anymore?" Smith turned back to face him, and in the moonlight his face seemed to shift, the lines deepening, the eyes darkening, revealing something ancient and hollow beneath the civilized surface. "Every doll in this house was a person. Every one of them came here seeking something, power, escape, understanding, and every one of them got what they wanted for a time. They became whoever they wished to become. They experienced lives they could never have lived otherwise. It was only when they tried to return to themselves that they discovered the truth. The truth being that they couldn't. The truth being that there was nothing to return to. The stone doesn't just transform the body, it transforms the soul. Every time you become someone else, you lose a piece of who you were, and eventually there's nothing left but the borrowed fragments, held together by the stone's power like a mosaic held together by grout. Marcus thought of Caddy Morrison, of the memory he had witnessed, of her face frozen in porcelain, of the consciousness that might still be trapped behind those glass eyes. Is she aware? The dolls, are they aware of what's happened to them? Smith's expression flickered, something that might have been regret, or might have been satisfaction, or might have been nothing at all. Awareness is a complicated concept. They don't think, not in the way you and I think. They don't feel pain or pleasure or longing. They're present, eternal witnesses, observing the passage of time from their shelves and cases. Some might call that awareness. Others might call it the closest thing to a death that a soul can experience without actually dying. That's not a life, that's a prison. Everything is a prison, detective. Your body is a prison, aging, decaying, limiting what you can experience. Your mind is a prison, constrained by assumptions and fears and the narrow perspective of a single life. The stone offers escape from both. Yes, the escape comes with a price, but what freedom doesn't? Smith walked toward Marcus, the stone glowing brighter with each step. I'm going to give you a choice, a real choice, not the manipulation I offered you before. You can accept what you've become, Harold Smith, master of this house, keeper of the stone. I'll teach you everything I know, share centuries of accumulated wisdom, guide you through the complexities of your new existence. You'll never be alone again, never be limited again, never be bound by the petty concerns of ordinary life. And if I refuse, then I'll take back what's mine. Smith held up the stone.
This form is borrowed, detective. The consciousness wearing it is temporary. One word from me, one act of will, and you'll dissolve back into the darkness from which I allowed you to emerge. You'll join my collection. Another beautiful doll, another eternal witness, another trophy in the gallery of souls. The choice hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Marcus thought of his life, his failed marriage, his distant children, his apartment on 4th Street that was more storage space than home. He thought of the cases he consumed, the victims he couldn't save, the truth he could never quite grasp. He thought of the board at Precinct 17, with its 27 faces staring back at him, waiting for answers that would never come. And he thought of Caddy Morrison's amused smile, frozen forever in porcelain. No. The word came from somewhere deep inside him, not from Smith's memories or Smith's voice, but from the fragment of Marcus Webb that still survived. I won't become you. I won't accept this. I won't stop fighting until I'm free or I'm destroyed. Smith's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of something that might have been respect, or might have been disappointment, or might have been nothing at all. A pity. You would have made an excellent successor. He raised the stone, and the world dissolved into light.
Chapter 15. The Light and the Darkness. Marcus fell. Not physically. His body remained standing in the bedroom, frozen like a statue in the moonlight. But his consciousness, his sense of self, plummeted through layers of reality like a stone dropped into deep water. He passed through Smith's memories again, faster this time, the images blurring into a kaleidoscope of stolen lives, faces he didn't recognize, places he had never been. Centuries of experience compressed into moments that felt like eternities. And beneath it all, threading through the chaos like a current in an ocean, was the presence of the stone. Marcus could feel it now, not just as an object, but as a consciousness of its own. Ancient, patient, hungry. It had been feeding on a human identity since before recorded history, drawing in souls like a spire draws in flies, transforming them into something it could consume. Smith was not its master. Smith was its servant, perhaps its oldest, most devoted servant, but a servant nonetheless. The stone used him as it used everyone else, as a means of attracting new victims, new sources of the identity it craved. "You understand now," a voice whispered in the darkness. It was not Smith's voice, not any human voice. It was the voice of the stone itself, speaking directly into Marcus's fragmenting consciousness. "You see what I am, what I have always been." "A parasite," Marcus said, or thought, or felt. Words had lost their meaning in this place. "A collector, a preserver. You mortals fear death, fear the dissolution of your precious selves into the void. I offer salvation. The dolls in my gallery will exist forever, their souls protected from entropy, their identities crystallized beyond the reach of time." "That's not salvation, that's consumption." "It is both. The caterpillar is consumed in becoming the butterfly. The acorn is consumed in becoming the oak. Transformation requires sacrifice. The only question is whether you will make that sacrifice willingly or whether it will be taken from you." Marcus felt the stone's presence pressing against him, trying to pry apart the remaining fragments of his identity. It wanted what was left of him, the memories of his childhood, his training, his failed marriage and distant children. It wanted the cases he had solved and the ones that still haunted him. It wanted everything that made him Marcus Webb. And there was so little left to defend. But buried deep within him, protected by the last walls of his dissolving self, was a single image. Caddy Morrison. Her tea-colored eyes, her amused smile, the photograph on his desk, the face he had promised to find.
Marcus wrapped himself around that image, like a man wrapping himself around a life preserver in a storm-tossed sea. He didn't know why it mattered so much. He had never met her, never spoken to her, knew her only through reports and interviews and the endless, futile search. But she had become something more than a missing person to him. She had become a symbol, a reason to keep going when the weight of unsolved cases threatened to crush him. And now, in this place of dissolution and despair, she became an anchor. "Curious," the stone whispered. "You cling to a stranger, a woman you never knew. Why?" "Because someone has to remember her. Because someone has to keep looking even when there's no hope. Because that's what we do. We hold on to the lost. We refuse to let them be forgotten. We keep them alive in the only way that matters." Noble. Futile, but noble. The pressure intensified. Marcus felt himself beginning to come apart, his memories scattering like leaves in a wind. His father's face dissolved first, then his mother's voice, then the 1,000 small moments that had made up his ordinary life. They were being stripped away, layer by layer, until the core remained, the essential Marcus Webb, the identity that existed beneath all of the accumulated experiences. And then, just when he thought he had nothing left to lose, he heard another voice. Not the stone's voice, a woman's voice. "Detective Webb, can you hear me?" It was Evelyn, Sarah, whoever she truly was. "I found the safe. I have the stone of unmaking, but I can't reach you. Smith has locked down the house, sealed every door, activated defenses I didn't know existed. You have to come to me." "I can't," Marcus whispered. "I'm trapped. The stone has me." "You're not trapped. You're still fighting. As long as you're fighting, there's a chance." Her voice was urgent, desperate. "Listen to me. The stone of becoming isn't invincible. It has a weakness. It can only hold one consciousness at a time. Right now, it's holding you because Smith willed it to. But if you can break that will, if you can assert your own identity strongly enough, you can force your way back." "How?" "Remember who you are, not who you were, not the memories and experiences the stone has been stripping away. Who you are, your purpose, your reason for existing, the thing that makes you Marcus Webb and no one else." Marcus searched through the wreckage of his consciousness, looking for something solid, something unassailable. The stone had taken so much, his childhood, his relationships, the texture of his daily life. But there was one thing it hadn't taken, one thing it couldn't take: his oath. To serve and protect, to seek truth and bring justice, to find the lost and bring them home. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't original, it was just a promise, the same promise made by thousands of officers before him and thousands who would come after him. But it was his promise, freely given, renewed every day through the simple act of doing his job. And it was enough. Marcus felt himself solidifying, the scattered fragments of his identity drawing together around that central core. He was a detective. He was a seeker of truth. He was a man who had spent 18 years trying to bring the lost home. And he was not finished yet. "No," the stone whispered, and for the first time, its voice held something like fear. "You cannot." "Yes," Marcus said. And he pushed. Chapter 16. The Tower. Marcus opened his eyes. He was back in the bedroom, his body, Smith's body, standing exactly where it had been when the light consumed him. The moon had moved across the sky, its light now falling differently through the windows, suggesting that hours had passed during his internal struggle. Smith was gone. So was the stone of becoming, but something else had changed. Marcus could feel it in his borrowed body, a loosening, a separation, as if the connection between his consciousness and this foreign form was beginning to weaken. The transformation was becoming unstable. He had hours, perhaps, before it collapsed entirely. He needed to find the stone of unmaking. He moved toward the door, his steps steadier now, his movements more assured. The internal battle had clarified something, had shown him that his identity, though battered and diminished, was still fundamentally his own. The stone had taken memories, experiences, the surface details of his life, but it had not taken his purpose, his core, the essential self that existed beneath all the accumulated layers. He was still Marcus Webb, and Marcus Webb had a job to finish. The hallway was dark when he emerged from the bedroom, the candles that had lit it earlier now extinguished, the windows at either end showing nothing but black sky and scattered stars. Marcus moved by memory, by the fragments of Smith's knowledge that still lingered in his borrowed mind. The library was on the first floor, at the rear of the house. To reach it, he would descend the grand staircase and cross the entrance hall, passing the collection of dolls that watched from their shelves with glass eyes. He began to descend. The dolls seemed different in the darkness. Their faces, which had been merely unsettling in the daylight, now seemed actively malevolent, twisted by shadow into expressions of rage and despair. Marcus told himself it was just a trick of the light, just his imagination responding to the horrors he had witnessed. But he could not shake the feeling that they were watching him, judging him, waiting to see whether he would join their ranks. He reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. The entrance hall was empty, but not silent. Somewhere in the darkness, something was moving, a soft, shuffling sound, like feet dragging across marble. Marcus held his breath, listening. The sound stopped. He waited, counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. He continued across the hall, his footsteps loud in the silence, his breathing shallow and quick. The door to the library was ahead, slightly ajar, a strip of golden light visible through the gap. Someone was in there. Marcus approached carefully, pressing himself against the wall beside the door. He could hear voices now, 2 of them, speaking in low, urgent tones. "You've betrayed me, Sarah, after everything I've given you. You've given me nothing but lies and imprisonment, 20 years of being someone I'm not, someone I never wanted to be. You chose this. You held the stone willingly. You became Evelyn of your own free will. I didn't know what I was choosing. You told me it would be temporary, that I could change back whenever I wanted. And so you could have, if you had been strong enough. The stone doesn't trap the worthy. It traps the weak, the indecisive, the ones who can't commit to a single identity. You failed, Sarah. That's not my fault." Marcus pushed the door open. The library was a vast room, 2 stories high, with bookshelves covering every wall and a rolling ladder on a brass track to reach the upper shelves. A fire burned in a massive stone fireplace, casting warm light across leather armchairs and antique reading tables. Smith stood in the center of the room, the stone of becoming glowing in his hand. And before him, pressed against the bookshelf beside a portrait of a stern-faced man, was Evelyn, Sarah, her face pale but defiant, her green eyes blazing with an anger that had been building for 2 decades. In her hand, she held another stone. It was the opposite of the one Smith held. Where that stone glowed with inner fire, this one seemed to absorb light, creating a sphere of shadow around itself. It was darker than dark, a piece of void given form, and even from across the room, Marcus could feel its power. The stone of unmaking. "Detective Webb," Smith said without turning around, "I wondered when you would rejoin us. I see you survived your journey into the stone's depths. Impressive, but ultimately futile. You cannot escape what you've become." "I don't need to escape," said Marcus, stepping into the room. "I just need to hold on long enough to finish this." He walked toward Sarah, keeping his eyes on Smith. The old man did not move to stop him. He seemed almost curious, as if watching an experiment play out. "The stone of unmaking will destroy you, detective. It doesn't restore identity, detective. It annihilates it. Sarah believes she can use it to become herself again, but she's wrong. The stone will consume everything. The transformation, yes, but also the consciousness beneath it. She'll cease to exist entirely, and so will you if you touch it. Marcus looked at Sarah. Her eyes met his, and he saw the truth in them, the fear that Smith might be right, the hope that he might be wrong. "Is it true?" he asked. "I don't know," she whispered. "I've never used it. I've never seen it used. But I know what the alternative is. I know what it means to spend eternity as one of his dolls, conscious but paralyzed, aware but unable to act. Anything is better than that." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then let's find out together." He reached out and took the stone of unmaking from her hand.
Chapter 17. The Unmaking. The stone was cold. The stone was cold. Not the cold of ice or metal, but the cold of absence, the cold of a vacuum, of empty space, of places where nothing existed and nothing ever would. Marcus felt it seeping into his borrowed flesh, spreading through his veins like frost crystals forming on a winter window. "Fascinating," Smith said, and his voice was calm, almost clinical. "I've always wondered what the stone would do when activated. I acquired it decades ago as a precaution, but I never had the courage to test it. Too risky, you understand. The stone doesn't discriminate between the transformed and the transformer." "Then you'll be destroyed too." "Perhaps. Or perhaps the stone of becoming will protect me, as it has protected me for nearly 2 centuries. We'll find out together, won't we?" Marcus felt the stone of unmaking pulsing in his hand, a slow, rhythmic pulse, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient and utterly unhuman. It was different from the stone of becoming, which had been active, eager, hungry for connection. This stone was passive, patient. It didn't seek out identity to consume. It simply waited, offering itself to anyone desperate enough to accept its gift. And Marcus was desperate enough. "I want to be myself again," he said, closing his eyes. "I want to be Marcus Webb. I want to go back to my life, my work, my purpose. I want to finish what I started." The stone responded, not with light as the other stone had, with darkness. A darkness that flowed out from Marcus's closed fist and spread across the library floor like spilled ink, swallowing the firelight, dimming the glow of the stone of becoming, transforming the room into a cavern of shadows. Smith stepped back, his pale eyes widening for the first time since Marcus had met him. "What have you done?" "What I came here to do," Marcus said, and he opened his eyes. The darkness was inside him now, flowing through the spaces where Smith's memories had been stored, filling the gaps where Marcus's own identity had been stripped away. It was not restoring him. Smith had been right about that. The stone of unmaking did not rebuild what had been lost. It simply unmade. Marcus felt his borrowed form beginning to dissolve, not into crystalline stasis of a doll, but into something else, something formless, something free. "No," Smith said, and he raised the stone of becoming. Its light flared, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. "I will not be undone. I have survived for 2 centuries. I have consumed hundreds of identities. I am more than any single consciousness, more than any mortal will. You cannot destroy me." The 2 lights, the fire and the void, met in the center of the room. For a moment, they seemed evenly matched. The darkness reached for the light burned against the darkness. Marcus felt himself caught between them, stretched thin, pulled in opposite directions by forces beyond his comprehension. And then he heard the voices. Caddy Morrison's voice first, confused and frightened, but gaining strength. Then others. Dozens of them, hundreds, rising from the darkness like bubbles from deep water. The voices of everyone the stone of becoming had consumed, everyone who had been transformed and crystallized and stored in Smith's collection. They were still there, still aware, as Evelyn had said,
and now, drawn by the stone of unmaking, they were waking up. "Let us go," they whispered. "Let us be unmade. Let us finally rest." Marcus understood what he had to do. He turned his focus away from himself, away from the survival instinct that screamed at him to fight, to hold on, to continue existing at any cost. Instead, he offered the stone's power to the voices, to the victims, the lost ones, the people who had been trapped for years or decades or centuries. "Take it," he thought. "Take the unmaking. Be free." The darkness surged. It swept through the house like a wave, flowing over the shelves and cases where the dolls stood in their eternal poses. And wherever it touched, the dolls began to change. Not to living flesh, the stone of unmaking was not that kind of power, but to dust, to memory, to the peaceful dissolution that death should have brought them long ago. Marcus watched through his dissolving eyes as Caddy Morrison's doll crumbled, its porcelain face relaxing into something like peace before disintegrating into a fine powder that scattered on an unfelt wind. He watched as 100 other dolls followed, the businessman, the nurse, the woman in Victorian dress, all the victims of Smith's centuries-long collection finally released from their crystalline prisons. And he watched as the darkness reached Harold Smith. The old man, the ancient man, the creature that had once been human and long since become something else, raised the stone of becoming like a shield. Its light blazed with desperate intensity, and for a moment it seemed like it might hold. Then the light flickered. "No," Smith whispered. "No, no, no." The darkness touched him. And Harold Smith, master of transformation, keeper of stolen identities, collector of souls, began to come apart. It was not a violent dissolution. There was no screaming, no thrashing, no dramatic final moment. Smith simply faded, like a photograph left too long in the sun, like a memory grown too old to hold. The light of the stone of becoming flickered once more, twice, and then went out. The stone fell to the floor, inert, lifeless, just another piece of rock in a room full of dust. And Smith was gone. Marcus stood alone in the library, surrounded by dust and silence. The fire had died to embers, and the only light came from the moon streaming through the windows. He looked down at his hands. They were solid again, not Smith's hands, his own hands, the hands of a 53-year-old detective worn by years of service, marked by the small scars and calluses of an ordinary life. The stone of unmaking had not destroyed him. It had unmade the transformation, stripped away the layers of borrowed identity, and returned him to what he had been before he entered this house. Marcus Webb, detective, seeker of truth, survivor.
Chapter 18. The Morning After. Dawn came slowly to Ashworth Hills. Marcus sat on the front steps of the Smith mansion, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pale gold. His body ached in ways he couldn't fully explain. Not physical pain, but something deeper. A bone tiredness that spoke of having traveled very far and returned changed. The house behind him was empty, not just of people, but of presence. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over it like a shroud was gone, replaced by the ordinary stillness of an abandoned building. The dolls were dust. The stones were inert. The master was unmade. It was over. Except that it wasn't, not really, because Marcus was still here, still alive, and he had a story to tell. He pulled his phone from his pocket. It was still there, undamaged, showing 16 missed calls from the precinct. He ignored them for now. Instead, he opens the camera and began recording. "My name is Marcus Webb," he said, speaking into the phone's tiny microphone. "I'm a detective with Precinct 17. I was assigned to investigate the disappearances connected to this address, 47 Larkspur Lane, the residence of Harold Alfred Smith. He paused, gathering his thoughts. What I found here, I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I believe it myself, not fully, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because someone has to know. Someone has to remember. He talked for a long time about the stone, about the transformations, about the dolls and the victims, and the 200-year-old monster who had hidden in plain sight. He talked about Caddy Morrison and Sarah Blackwood and all the others whose names he had never learned. He talked about the stone of unmaking and the choice he had made and the feeling of dissolution that had touched him before somehow sparing him. When he was finished, the sun was fully up, painting the iron gates and the stone walls with warm, golden light. Marcus ended the recording and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He didn't know if anyone would believe him. He didn't know if his video would be dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized officer or taken seriously as evidence of something inexplicable. But he had done what Sarah asked, what Evelyn asked, what all of them had asked in their way. He had remembered. He stood slowly, his joints protesting, and walked down the gravel driveway toward the gate. It stood open, as it had when he arrived, but now the opening felt different, not like a trap, but like a door. A door he was finally free to walk through. He stepped out onto Larkspur Lane, leaving the Smith mansion behind him. And as he walked toward the city, toward the precinct and the reports he would have to file and the questions he would have to answer, he allowed himself one final look back. The house stood in the morning light, grand and empty, and slowly beginning to decay. In a few years it would be sold. In a few decades it would be demolished. The story of Harold Smith would fade into legend, then into rumor, then into nothing.
Chapter 19. The Case File. Addendum. Excerpt from the official report filed by Detective Marcus Webb, Precinct 17, October 22nd. On the evening of October 21st, I arrived at 47 Larkspur Lane to conduct a welfare check and investigate possible connections to ongoing missing persons cases. Upon arrival, I found the property abandoned and in a state of significant disrepair. There was no evidence of current habitation. A search of the premises revealed extensive collections of antique dolls and artifacts consistent with the known interests of property owner Harold Alfred Smith. However, Mr. Smith himself was not present, and neighbors report not having seen him for several weeks. No evidence directly connecting the property to any open missing persons cases was discovered. However, given the proximity of the residence to several disappearance locations, the case remains open pending further investigation. Recommendation: continued surveillance of property, background investigation into Harold Smith's whereabouts, coordination with Cold Case Unit regarding historical disappearances in the Ashworth Hills area. Personal note, unofficial: sometimes the truth is not something that can be written in a case file. Sometimes the best we can do is remember and wait and hope that our memories are enough to keep the darkness at bay. Detective Marcus Webb. Chapter 20. Epilogue. 1 year later. The rain was falling hard on the city, turning the streets into rivers and the sky into a gray curtain that blocked out everything but the immediate. Marcus Webb sat at his desk in Precinct 17, staring at a new board with new faces, new cases, new mysteries to be solved. The stone case had been closed, officially at least. Harold Smith had been declared a missing person himself, his property eventually absorbed by the state, his collection of antiques and dolls sold at auction to collectors who had no idea of their true nature. The house on Larkspur Lane had been purchased by a developer who planned to demolish it and build luxury condominiums on the site. Marcus had tried to warn them. He had submitted his video testimony, had spoken to anyone who would listen about what he had experienced in that house, but video could be faked, experiences could be imagined, and a detective with no physical evidence was just a man with a story. The department had suggested counseling. His captain had gently hinted that it might be time to think about retirement. His colleagues looked at him differently now, with pity mostly, or uncomfortable concern. But Marcus didn't care. He knew what he had seen, he knew what he had done, and he knew that somewhere out there the truth was still waiting to be found. The board in front of him held 12 new faces, 12 people who had disappeared in the past year, their last known locations scattered across the city. Some of them might have walked away from their lives voluntarily, some of them might have met with violence, and some of them might have found something they weren't supposed to find. Marcus reached for his coffee and took a long sip, his eyes never leaving the faces on the board. The stone of becoming had been destroyed, he was certain of that. He had watched it go dark, had felt the power drain out of it when Smith was unmade. But Smith had spoken of acquiring the stone in 1847, of finding it in an ancient tomb in the Syrian desert. If there had been one such stone, there might be others. Marcus set down his coffee and reached for his phone. He had a call to make, an old contact in the antiquities community, someone who might know about unusual artifacts coming onto the market. The rain continued to fall outside his window, washing the city clean, burying secrets beneath layers of time and water. But some secrets refused to stay buried, and Marcus Webb, survivor and seeker, would never stop looking.